Okay, thanks everyone. We'll get started and hopefully there'll be some others joining us as we get going. For those that I've not met before, thank you for joining. It's great to have you here and part of the Australian Behavioural Science Network. My name is Alison McLean. I work at AAA Australia, and my other members of the network, Aaron and Merla and Adeline, can't be here today. But if there's ever any kind of topics or feedback that you have about the network, please reach out to one of us, and we'd love to hear from you as to what you want to see in these sessions. So today, I am very excited about our speaker, but before we jump into that introduction, I just wanted to take a minute to do acknowledgement of country. So I know we're on many, many different lands today, a great virtual audience spread around Australia and usually New Zealand and other parts of the world as well. For myself, I'm in Melbourne today, and I'm on the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the people of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, to the elders past, present, and emerging, and any who might be here with us today. I also want to just do a shout out to UTS, who continue to be our sponsors of these meetups. We have the UTS team have developed a postgraduate program in behavioural economics, and they also offer free online programs about introduction to behavioural economics and micro-credentials and a graduate certificate and a master's in behavioural economics. I'm going to pop into the chat the link where you can learn more information about those courses, and I know many of the community have been on those and speak really highly of them. So we'll pop that into the chat, and thanks to UTS for continuing to provide the support to us. So with that, it brings me to our speaker today, and I'm very excited to hear from Dr. Elif. I've not met Dr. Elif before, but as I said to her earlier, many people who do the UTS course tell me that she is one of their favourite lecturers, so I'm sure we're in for a great treat today. So Dr. Elif is a senior lecturer, assistant professor of economics at UTS. She's a behavioural economist employing experimental methods to delve into individuals' decision-making processes and the impact of crucial life outcomes on the crucial life outcomes such as education, employment, and wealth. I was really interested in Dr. Elif to see that she also started in her career in industrial engineering, and I wondered how that went from there to behavioural economics, but that could be an interesting story interesting thing in the question time. Today, Dr. Elif is going to be talking to us about the transformative potential of correcting misperceived social norms. Fascinating topic and really timely discussion, I think, around this. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Elif. Anyone who has questions, we'll do those at the end. So just pop them into the chat so we can keep a track of them. And we'll have at least kind of 15 minutes at the end to have a good discussion. So thanks very much. And thanks, Dr. Elif.
Thank you very much, Alison. It is great to be here. Thank you very much for coming to this talk. I see that some familiar faces here. It is wonderful to see you guys. Okay, so let me organize my page. And okay, today I am going to talk about misperceived social norms, which is going to be very much about social norms that I believe a lot of you, are familiar with. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Alison gave a great introduction. Thank you very much, Alison. So my PhD is in economics. It was a long time ago. I graduated as an industrial engineering from the industrial engineering program. I guess I cannot call myself industrial engineer anymore. So I did my PhD in economics, and I did it from Penn State University in US, and I taught at Carnegie Mellon University between the years 2007 and 2017, and then joined UTS in 2017. Currently, I am teaching behavioral decision-making and behavioral game theory courses at the Master of Behavioral Economics program at UTS. My research interests are in behavioral economics and its applications. Specifically, I am very interested in time and risk preferences. I have worked on those topics for a long time. But recently, I am fascinated with misperception of social norms, and I'm interested in social norms and applications these days. I felt like, I was going, I was a little bit doing everything, which is not, great idea. I guess in academics, it is better to focus on one thing, but I guess this is what my interest took me to. So the social norms is my recent interest. So, and especially the misperception of social norms. Okay, most of you probably know about norm nudging, but I will give you my definition of norm nudging as well as social norms as a start so that it will help me to talk about misperception of social norms and how those misperceptions can be used in a way to nudge people in a good direction. So norm nudging is a specific type of nudge in which people are given social information with the purpose of steering them into a direction so that they will make better decisions, basically. Cristina Behavioural, who is an expert in social norms, say that nudges are the interventions for individual decision-making, and norm nudges are interventions to steer the decision-making of a social group, a bigger group. So if you think about this, it can be considered as a nudging in a big scale. In order to talk about norm nudging effectively, we need to have a definition of social norms. And the definition that I would like to use for the purpose of this talk will be the following. Social norms are behavioral rules that are followed conditionally, okay? So we can think of them as behavioral rules that are followed conditionally. I highlighted the conditionally because that is going to be really, really important, meaning that people will follow these rules under some conditions. What are those conditions? The first condition is that you believe that many people, many others in your social group will follow that behavioral rule. That is one condition. Let me give you an example. You dress in a certain way when you go to work retreat, okay? If you expect other people, your coworkers, to follow business casual, for example, you probably will follow that dress code. It's not necessarily because you prefer to dress business casual, but it is because you expect others to dress that way. So there's this conditionality, conditional on what you expect, what you believe, what most others are going to do in your social environment, in your social circle. So that is the first condition. Sometimes people call this descriptive norm. I am not, very fond of this label, but for the sake of this talk, I am going to call it descriptive norm. The other condition, remember that we said people follow these behavioral rules under some conditions. The second condition is that you believe that most others in your social circle think that you should do what you should do is important. So this is also called the injunctive norm. Okay. So conditional on that you believe that most others in your social circle believe that what you should be doing is going to be also important. Okay, so I am going to come back to this conditionality in a moment, but let's talk about, let's remember some of the nudges, social norm nudges that almost everyone seems to know, okay? So for example, this famous hotel towel study, right? In this famous hotel towel study, probably most of you already know about this, but if you do not know, the goal is to nudge people to reuse their towels, nudge hotel guests to reuse their towels. And one way to do this is to use norm nudging. In this case, for example, if you tell, there are multiple ways, of course, to nudge people, right? So you can give them some information, you can tell them how important it is to reuse your towel for the environment and all of that, right? But you can also do norm nudging. In the norm nudging case, if people's behavior of reusing their towels is conditional, if that is the case, if it is a conditional behavior, just telling people that most others like you were reusing their towels will affect their decision making and hopefully will make them to reuse their towels, right? So that is what the study is about. They are given a descriptive norm. They are given an information about what most others do in order to make them to reuse their towels. And this study was successful to increase the reuse of the towels. Another well-known study, I call it electricity bill study. In this electricity bill study, most of you may be already familiar about, is that as a consumer, electricity consumer, you receive your statement, you receive your bill, but in your bill, in your statement, you are not only told about your consumption of about your electricity consumption, but you are also told about your efficient neighbor's electricity consumption. So if social norms are not affected, if people are not affected by other people's behavior, by other people's actions, there is no point of giving this type of information. But if people are affected, if people's behavior is some behavior, not all of them, if some people are, some behaviors of some people are conditional on what other people do, then giving this type of information, which is a descriptive norm, may be helpful to decrease the electricity usage of these consumers. So this is an example of a descriptive norm. You are telling people what others do in your social circle. And this study was also effective by just telling that your efficient neighbors are, consuming this much energy, were helpful to decrease the energy consumption of these users. I needed to give an example of the injunctive norm as well, and I found this as an example. This is not well known. This is from Michigan State University. In this norm, this is an injunctive norm as it is known among practitioners and the policymakers. You are told that more than 9 out of 10 Michigan State students approve of their fellow Spartans choosing not to drink when partying or socializing with friends. So the goal in this case in the Michigan State University is to decrease the amount of irresponsible drinking. And they give this information, this injunctive norm, in order to do that. So these are all examples of descriptive norms and injunctive norms, how they are given in general. So here is the thing. We have lots of nudge units around the world. We have behavioral insights units around the world. And it is so common to use social norms as a nudging instrument. You probably saw this on your bus ride. 9 out of 10 customers pay their fare. That is an example of a descriptive norm. Or maybe if you are a family doctor prescribing medicine, maybe you received a letter from Behavioural Economics team of Australia saying that, okay, you are prescribing this much antibiotics. Your peers are prescribing this much antibiotics with the hope of decreasing the antibiotic prescriptions by family doctors. So these are all the examples of the social norms, how they can be used descriptively or injunctively in order to change the behavior. Now, let's come back to the definition I gave earlier. So I said that social norms are behavioral rules that are followed conditionally under 2 conditions. And these 2 conditions were that most others do. So what most others do is important, and what most others think that what you should do is important, right? But this belief part, I want to bring your attention to the belief part. This is really, really important. The crucial aspect is in people's beliefs regarding others' actions, rather than the real actions themselves. What you believe about what other people do, rather than actually what they are doing, right? It is very, very important. Likewise, importance is on individuals' perceptions of what others approve of, rather than what they actually approve of. So as a result, these beliefs, these perceptions are really, really important in norm nudging. Since it is the belief that is crucial, we need to pay attention to the possibility that these beliefs may not be always correct, which brings me to my topic of misperceived social norms. Okay. Although social norm nudging is a popular method to use, in many cases, we may not see an effect of this type of nudging. There may be multiple reasons for that, and Cristina Bichieri, as I said, the expert in social norms, would explain all these possible reasons why the norm nudging in some cases will not work. But one reason for them not to work might be because it is very, very hard to change these established norms. It takes years for these norms to be what they are. Of course, you cannot change these norms overnight by just telling people that, okay, this many people are doing this, and this people think you should be behaving that way, right? It may be really, really hard to change the behavior by trying to change the established norm. However, sometimes it is not the bad norm causing harmful behavior, but it is the underestimation of the positive norm or overestimation of the negative norm having an effect. This is very important because, and we call this misperception of the norm. This is important because it may be much easier to make an impact and change the behavior by correcting these misperceptions rather than trying to change the established, correctly perceived norms. Maybe it is important to measure when people are misperceiving these social norms in the areas that norms are misperceived. Maybe we can have more bang for our buck, okay? So in order to explain misperceptions and how they can be used to nudge people, I will tell you about a number of recent studies done in this area, mainly in the policy domain. Even if you are not interested in policy, or if you are a practitioner and interested in social norm nudging, I think you will find these studies very useful to get some important takeaway messages from this talk. Okay. Now, the first study is the first that I'll tell you about is labor market participation, female labor market participation in Saudi Arabia. If you are wondering whether you are in the right talk, don't worry, you are in the right talk. But this study is a very good study to demonstrate the importance of measuring misperceptions. That is why I'm going to tell you about this study. So in Saudi Arabia, labor market participation has been always low. If you look at the chart, the labor market participation in 1990s, this is Saudi Arabia, and this is the world average. Over time, you see that the female labor force participation increasing, especially in the last 10-15 years, because this country made a lot of attempts in order to increase the female labor force participation. This is a good context to study misperceptions and the effect of how we can use these misperceptions in order to improve the outcomes. Because first of all, to begin with, the outcomes are really, really low. I mean, the female labor force participation is really, really low. If the misperceptions and social norms can be used in order to improve the outcomes, we can test it in this setting because there's a lot of room for improvement. That's one reason. The other is, this is a country which is changing very fast in the last 10-15 years. Why this is important for me? Because in the fast changing societies, it is likely to see misperceptions. It is more likely to observe misperceptions. So we are likely to observe these misperceptions in this setting. These researchers, Burstein and his colleagues, they run a study and they want to understand whether they can use misperceptions and social norm nudging in order to improve female labor force participation. So their study is very, very simple. They survey and they invite Saudi married males into a room for an in-person study. and they surveyed them. And in this survey, they asked them very simple questions. One question they ask is, do you agree with the following statement, which says, in my opinion, women should be allowed to work outside of home? And the responder is supposed to say yes or no. Okay, that's what they ask. This is how they measure the actual norm. What percent of this survey population says, I agree with this statement, okay? They are measuring the actual norm about women working outside of home in this context. But they also want to measure the perceived norm, because the actual norm may not be the same as the perceived norm. So they ask the following question next. If you had to guess, how many people among the 29 other study participants, they had 29 participants in the room, do you think agree with the same statement? So this was measuring the actual norm, and this is measuring the perceived norm. Okay, so I am trying to guess what percent of my social circle will agree with the same statement. I am trying to guess that, right? So what they find is the following. They find that most men think that it is okay for women to work outside of home. Actually, opposition for women to work outside of home is really, really high, 13%. 13% was opposing to this idea, okay? Actual opposition is very little. But when you look at the perceived opposition, when you ask them what percent of your social circle will oppose women to work outside of home, you see a big difference, okay? So there's a misperception here. This is an underestimation of a positive norm. It is not a negative, it is not the existence of a negative norm. It is the underestimation of a positive norm, okay? So remember what I said earlier, it is hard to change established norms. However, if the problem is the misperception of good norm, that's a low-hanging fruit for us. We can just give people information saying that actually you are wrong. You think that it is 13%, you think that it is 37% opposing women to work outside of home. Actually, it is only 13%. That is what they do in this study. And they give this information for their randomly selected half of their study population. They give this information. They tell them actually only 13% is opposing a woman to work outside of home. And in the control condition, they don't give them any information. And they look at the outcomes after. What they find is the following. They found that the wives of the men who received the information treatment were 3 times more likely to have applied for a job, and they were almost 4 times more likely to have gone to an interview. So it looks like this simple information treatment, just because there was this misperception of social norm, was successful, okay? Actually, we did a study in Saudi Arabia again. We replicate this study with male and female university students exactly. And we are currently running a study in which we investigate of the social norms in different social circles. Okay, so this, So this study is really good to show you, okay, the importance of measuring the actual and the perceived norms, and to understand whether there's a difference between them. So key takeaways from this study is that norms are sometimes misperceived. And when they are misperceived, cheap and simple information treatments work. It is helpful. And it is, as a result, it is very important to identify misperceptions, okay? So it is, I want to tell you when these misperceptions arise, more likely to arise. These misperceptions, if you want to think about how this can be used in your work, in your area, misperceptions are likely to arise when there is a very fast change in the society, as in the case of Saudi Arabia. Or misperceptions are likely to arise when people do not discuss a topic much. Think about domestic violence. Do people discuss that? I mean, in their daily life, do they discuss that topic? They don't, right? So the misperceptions are likely to arise about the topics which are not discussed much. And also availability heuristic may be effective in order to create these misperceptions, but I'm not going to go into that. Okay, so if you think that, oh, okay, this is, the purpose of talking about this study was to tell you about the importance of identifying misperceptions. But if you think that, okay, this is Saudi Arabia, this is so far, it's not relevant, I can tell you another study, which is a little bit more relevant for Australia, working mothers in USA. They study opinions regarding mothers' work decisions using hypothetical scenarios presented to a representative sample of respondents. In these scenarios, the researchers specifically asked respondents about their own recommendation and their perception of the recommendations of those living in the same part of the country as them about whether a mother with a young child should accept a job offer to return to work. And they also asked participants about whether a wife rather than the husband should take the time off from work to care for their young children. In this study, what they found is that 31% recommend a mother with a young child to stay at home. More men on average hold less progressive attitudes than women. And most importantly, most of these surveyed people think that others around them are less progressive. So that's a misperception. That's a misperception which can be used in order to improve the female labor force participation in a country like USA. So that is what they did in the study. They give this de-biasing information, they give the correct information, and they randomly provide half of the sample with the information. And they found that the treatment group are less likely to recommend the rejection of a job offer for the woman. And the more importantly, the bigger the misperception is, the bigger the effect was. So the bigger the misperception is, the more likely that we will have an effect by giving this information, by giving people information, by correcting these misperceptions. So this is a low-hanging fruit, which should be, in my opinion, we should be investigated, which should be given a chance in different policy domains. Actually, at the end of the slide, I am going to tell you a little bit about in what other areas that can be used, hopefully if I have time. Okay, so I'm going to just... Okay, there is also a paper looking at gender norms all around the world. What they do is that the authors of that Saudi Arabia paper, they were successful to put some questions in the Gallup World Poll in order to measure misperceptions about gender norms all over the world. Gallup World Poll is a global survey. It is done in more than 160 countries, and it has been done since 1938. So in the World Poll 2020, these researchers were able to include 2 questions to measure actual norms and the perceived norms about gender. So as in the first paper, Saudi Arabia paper, they ask a very simple question. Do you agree with this following statement, which is women should have the freedom to work outside of home, and they measure the actual opinions. And if you want to see what are the actual opinions all over the world, you will see that, okay, in most of the countries, the attitude is, most of the people say that, yes, women should be free to work outside of home, okay? So this is good news, but remember, their goal is also to measure perceived norms, right? So they also measured perceived norm by asking this question. Oops, sorry. And this is what they found. Why this map is red all over is because these underestimation of progressive norms are everywhere in the world. Not in one country. This is Australia. It is a little bit smaller, this underestimation, but still there. We don't have overestimation of the progressive norm. We have underestimation of the progressive norm all over the world, okay? So that shows that there is a room to use social norms in order to improve outcomes for women. Let's go to the climate change. And this is a very nice, very recent study I find it very interesting. They look at the they measure the actual and perceived support for climate action in this study. Again, they use the Gallup World Poll, and they ask two questions in order to measure actual and the perceived norms. Okay. So these researchers, this is done in 129 countries and nearly 130,000 individuals all over the world. So again, they ask you a question: would you be willing to contribute 1% of your household income every month to fight global warming? This is asked in 125 countries, remember. If you want to know the answers, here is the answers. 69% of the study participants says, yes, I am willing to contribute 1% of my income per month to fight climate change, right? This is very good news, okay? So you can also look at different countries, how they answered. This is Australia. More than 50% said that, yes, I am willing to pay 1% of my monthly salary. Okay, remember that we don't only want to measure the actual opinions, we want to measure the perceived opinions as well, okay? So they did this, they asked this question to their respondents. We are asking this question to 100 other respondents in Australia, for example. How many do you think are willing to contribute at least 1% of their household income every month to fight global warming? And this is the result. Remember, in reality, 69% says that, yes, I am willing to fight against climate change, right? But their perception about others is only 43%. There's a big gap. There's a big misperception here. Is this because of some of the countries, there are weird answers or something like that? No, these are all the countries they surveyed. In every country, the circles are the actual responses, and the triangles are the perceived responses. You see a misperception, underestimation of positive attitudes in every one of these countries. Okay, so this is important because, remember, I am gonna repeat myself. It is hard to change established norms, but it is much easier to correct misperceived, underestimated norms. Underestimated positive norms. So this is an opportunity for us. Okay, so seeing this misperception for the climate action case, they decided to investigate further this in the US population. So they focus on US sample. They survey a representative sample of 8,000 American adults, and they elicit their they elicit actual norms, elicit individual actions and opinions. They also, just like the previous papers, they also elicit perceived norms in order to understand whether there are differences, and also if there are differences, they expect to find a difference because of the previous study, world study, right? So, and then to see whether information treatments would be helpful in order to make people take an action against climate change. So this is what they found. When they ask Americans, they say 62% of the Americans say that they try to fight global warming, but this was perceived as 51, underestimation of the good norm. Similarly, they were asked about the injunctive norm as well, and 79% of Americans think that people in the US should try to fight global warming. This was the reality, okay, that is what they think. But this is perceived as 61, underestimation. So there is an opportunity here. If we correct these misperceptions with proper information, maybe people take action. So that is what they do. They run an experiment for the treatment group. They give an information, correct information, and either the information about the descriptive norm or the information about the injunctive norm. And what they find is that they find there are increased donations for charity, which is actively contributing to carbon mitigation by promoting renewable energy. And they also find that the treatment increased the people's support for policies to fight climate change, and it also increased their support for political activism. Okay, so related to this, one thing which very much attracted my attention on this paper was the misperceptions. Was the specific misperceptions they look at, how people try to fight climate change in different categories. In this study, in addition to asking people whether they are willing to fight against climate change, they also ask them specific questions. For example, they ask them, do you restrict meat consumption? Do you avoid taking flights? And all of these specific questions. And they also elicit the perceived norms. So this is what they find. For example, about 40% says that I try to restrict meat consumption. And this is the perception, which is very close. There doesn't seem to be much misperception in there. However, when you look at the avoid taking the flights, you see that a lot of people say that they try to avoid taking flights. But when they think about the others, when they try to, what is their perception about others, they think that, others do not try to avoid the flights that much. So there is a misperception in this domain, okay? So if you are a behavioral scientist, and if you decided to use social norm nudging in order to increase people taking action against climate change, this is very useful for you in terms of deciding what to target. So you're not going to give all these social norm, nudging in every category, right? So if I see this, I feel like this is the category I should target because this is the easiest. This is going to be more likely to have an effect. Okay, so these are about the descriptive norms, right? So what people do. In this paper, they also ask injective norms. They ask people, do you think you should restrict meat consumption? Do you think people should restrict meat consumption? They ask. And they also ask their perception of other people's responses to this question. So these are the normative beliefs. Again, in the normative beliefs, you may see some misperceptions, okay? And if you see the misperceptions, that is the one you need to target in order to change the behavior. If I was a behavioral scientist trying to, improve the, trying to nudge people to take climate action, I would use this type of a table and I would look at where the misperceptions are and where the misperceptions are, whether the misperceptions are the same or similar in the descriptive domain and in the normative domain, okay? For example, so in the normative domain, using car alternatives, there seems to be a big misperception, underestimation of the positive norm, right? So this is an opportunity. Is it very similar in the descriptive norm? It seems in the same direction, so that's a good alternative. But what about use electricity from green sources? So there is an underestimation of the good norm in the injunctive norm, in the injunctive part. But when you look at the descriptive part, that is in the other direction. In order for social norm nudging to be successful, it is important, I think it is important to have both descriptive and the injunctive norms on the same direction. And also misperceptions are telling us the same thing. So what I am trying to say that it is very important to measure actual and perceived norms, to see where these misperceptions are in order to target decide which areas to target. Okay, what about applications, other applications? Is it only gender or climate change? No, actually there are studies in the health domain. For example, overestimation of risky drinking behavior and drug use or risky sexual behavior for young individuals. There are studies. They show that these young individuals overestimate their peers' risky drinking behavior, drug use, and risky sexual behavior. Since they are overestimating, they are affected by that. Their behavior is affected by that. So if they are overestimating, if you give them a correct information, maybe you can help them to avoid risky behavior. And this can also be used in education, I think. For example, it is important what your peers' attitude towards education and what your belief about your peers' attitude about education, right? So are there misperceptions here? Is there misperception especially more among underrepresented minorities? Okay, that is possible. So if you want to improve the outcomes of underrepresented minorities, for example, you may want to measure the actual and perceived norms. You may want to see whether there is a misperception there to be utilized. And also, you can also use, just like in other social norm study, you can do things in the saving and spending behavior. You can measure what is the actual norm about spending and saving, and the perceived norm about spending and saving. You can see whether there are misperceptions there. So the main takeaways is, what I would like you to take away from this talk is that identify misperceptions. Look at the actual norms and look at the perceived norms. Is there a big difference? Whenever you see a big difference, it's an opportunity. It's a low-hanging fruit to change the behavior. So, and you can use this information to help target the areas to focus on. It is still norm nudging, but it's a better informed norm nudging. And misperceptions in both descriptive and injunctive norms, if they are in the same direction, it is even better. So there is even a better opportunity there. So that is my talk is all about. I guess there is only this main message that, okay, when you want to do social norm nudging, do not just jump into that right away. If possible, measure the norms, measure the actual norms and the misperceived norms, and see whether there is a difference. If there's a difference, that might be the area that you want to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Fascinating talk, and we've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to jump in so we make the most of the time. And there's quite a lot around social desirability bias. So I'm going to start with, we've got 2 questions on that and lots of likes as well. So do you think the difference between actual and perceived norm, do you think the difference between actual and perceived norm on donating 1% of salary to climate change is influenced by social desirability? If there was a button, and just to say, if there was a button in the survey that said, click here to sign up for the salary deduction, do you think it would actually be 69% that would sign up?
I mean, that's a very good point. Yeah, definitely. In this type of studies, you would always be worried about social desirability bias. The things that will be that will make you less worried about social desirability bias is that if the survey is anonymous, if no one knows who you are, and all of those things. But there are also methods to deal with the social desirability bias. They call it a list experiment. So I don't want to go into the details of this list experiment, but when you run this, what is called list experiment, there is a way to measure the actual outcomes, actual opinions, by eliminating the social desirability bias part. I don't remember exactly whether they did list experiment in their paper. This paper is in Nature, but that's a very valid point, definitely. I mean, maybe there's a social desirability, but given that this paper is published in Nature, I would think that they were careful to take care of that, but I don't remember exactly whether they took care of it. There are ways to take care of that, yeah.
Thank you. And are you across any work in Australia that is around changing or correcting the misperceptions around climate action?
I mean, I guess I'm a very bad person to answer that question. My work is, I mean, I did not work on climate action policies or in that area. So I feel like there are a lot of work, but I am sorry, I cannot tell you much about that.
No problem. Thank you. Now, there's another question. Would it work the same way with norms you want to eradicate?
Oh, I mean, I think the social, I mean, Saudi Arabia study, for example, the norm that you want to eradicate, I mean, it is already not there, but people think that it is there, right? So the norm, people think that it is the norm that women should not be working outside of home. So that is the norm that you want to eradicate, but it is not there, actually. I guess the point is that, yes, I mean, for the norms that you want to eradicate or for the norms you want to, I mean, increase to bring, that will work both ways. As long as what I say is that as long as there are big misperceptions, that's a big opportunity in either way.
And I want to ask a little bit around the information that people get about actual norms. So I think sometimes this can come from different sources that is presented as being actual norms. And I think we see that potentially in election polls, for example, making projections or predictions around what's happening. And I'm just interested in that because, you know, what information or how do we influence it, or what is the interaction of those different information sources that could actually have on this, you know, people's perception as well, depending on where that information is coming from.
I think okay, so this is not only about social norms, but it's about in general for information, right? I mean, you are most likely familiar with the messenger effect, right? So I don't remember exactly the reference for that, but there was a recent paper looking at how people respond to the information depending on the source of the information. So there is work on that area. There's a lot of work, but I don't think I can tell you, I mean, more specific on that, but I will look it up for you. I remember that someone shared on Twitter about, I mean, how the source of the information may affect how people react depending on the source of the information, and depending on the political inclination of the person, also the source matters. So they run this study in US, in the US political area, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Cass Sunstein's done some on that, hasn't he? Like the same information to different groups and sends people towards kind of different ends of the kind of spectrum of beliefs. But yeah, I think just interesting, given, you know, the studies that you presented saying this is the norm, or this is the kind of, you know, actual norm, and it's, you know, obviously there's going to be different sources of what the actual norm might be. So yeah, very interesting.
This reminded me of another thing. So they look at the niche studies. I think it was Stefano Dellavigna's paper. So they look at the niche studies and they ask people, they measure how people react depending on where the norm coming from. If the norm is coming from government or from an industry, I mean, from a company, people react differently. The trust is very important factor in there. Yeah.
Interesting. Good. Okay. I think that's. Let me just check. Let's see if there's any other. One more question. If anyone else has any, we've got still a couple of minutes left. So just to say here, it is really interesting to see the misperceptions of norms could possibly be contributing to an intention action gap. Are you aware of any studies that connect these norm misperceptions and the intention action gaps with specific behaviour change techniques to try and overcome this?
That's very interesting. So I did not come across studies which make that connection, actually. I think that's a very interesting connection, intention-action gap and the misperception of social norms. I mean, from the papers that I read about misperception of social norms, I don't remember anyone, talking about intention-action gap, making that connection. That's very interesting.
Thank you. Okay. Yep, and lots of great feedback and saying thank you for sharing the examples. The one from Saudi Arabia has really landed very well and people enjoyed that. So thank you so much for sparing your time today, Dr. Elif. I think this has been a really interesting topic, but also really practical. I think there's a lot of things that we can take away here and build into our day-to-day work. I know I certainly will be talking with the team about that. So a big thank you and thanks for everyone who's joined today. Any feedback, as I said, please pop it on the meetup. We're always looking at what topics you want to have within this community. So great to get your thoughts on that as well. So, and with that, thank you very much, everyone. For those in Australia, have a lovely long weekend and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.